let's move back now to agenda item 10. This is titled Utah Education, and I'm going to turn time over to member Jenny Earl.
Yeah, let me pull up. It's just a recommendation for us to just kind of submit to the federal government, just that we are interested in having the resources and the funds stay within the state of Utah, and that we, I guess I need to probably put a motion on the board, that we are interested in Utah managing those funds and just taking that responsibility on. So let me put a motion before the board. I move that the board approve the intent letter April 3rd, 2025.
Okay, the motion has been stated. Do we have a second? Second to that. Back to you, member Earl.
Yeah. So, and once again, like I stated, this isn't a motion to. Well, the intent letter is just that. It's just to let people know this is Utah's capable. We're interested in it. We have the expertise here in the state. As a matter of fact, I've had a few people contact me saying, "Oh, what will happen if what will happen to our special ed students?" And I said, "Well, the very qualified people that provide their services right now will provide their services. We're asking that funding remain in the state, and that we are able to use that funding for the purposes of providing for our students." And the other thing, this morning as we were passing our at-risk rule, I realized that Utah really is uniquely set up. We have processes in place already. If that money came back right now for Title I and we had it here in the state, we would have a process. We may have to add some other provisions or whatever, but the districts already, we have a mechanism for providing them funding for their students that are at risk. This would just, we were on a 10-year plan, right, with the legislature. They're gradually increasing that at-risk funding, and I think that this adds that potential that we just expand on what we're already doing. So I do think that like I said, the expertise is here. We've got such great qualified people already thinking ahead. I don't know what the next month will bring. It seems like every day there's a new new change of something, right? And so this tried to respond to people's requests and their feedback, simplifying it enough that it, there was concerns over using the word block grant, and there was concerns over using certain words. So this is just a simple statement that says, hey, we can do this. We're ready to do it. We can take this on. So anyways, that's what's before the body.
Thank you, member Earl. So the motion before the board then is that the board approve distributing the letter of the intent letter 2025. Not seeing. Okay, member Reel.
Thank you, Chair Hymas, and I do want to recognize that I know that a lot of good work, and member Earl is, in my humble opinion, the best collaborator that I know. It does a great job of listening to everyone's thoughts as they put this letter together. Regardless of how this letter ends up, I'm going to be in opposition to this letter. When I teach my students about the lead up to the Constitution, I talk about the Articles of Confederation, often forgotten, but really important. And the Articles of Confederation failed because there was not enough power in the federal government. They had no power to do anything. They couldn't collect taxes. They had to have they were in charge of the military. They had to have but they didn't have any money. So the Articles of Confederation, I think, taught us a really important lesson that led into how we got to where we are on the Constitution in the balancing of state and federal. It's a very delicate balance. It's one of my favorite things to teach about. Federalism actually is one of my favorite constitutional principles. And it's because I love that the idea that we as states get to have the opportunity to govern ourselves, because I believe that government works best when they're closest to the people. And the example that I always tell my students is, I don't think you want the federal government in charge of making sure there's enough dog poop bags at your dog park, right? We need them close to us, right? Government is better when it's close to us. But with the Articles of Confederation, what we learned was that there was a need for unity as a country. We didn't want to have, a dictatorship or anything that they had when they were under the British rule, but what they wanted was something that unified the nation, and that was very important. I am a true believer in federalism, and I love states' rights, but I believe there is a deep importance for us to be unified as a nation, and I believe that is especially important in education. So for me, there are a lot of talks about Title I and special education. I understand that. But to me, it's actually a lot of the small things that worry me when we are not unified as a nation in education. And those are things like data collection, including data privacy. The Department of Education is statutorily mandated to enforce national student privacy laws. We have things like our high school longitudinal study that's really important. All of these research and projects and things that we do at that the Department of Education does are pivotal for us to being able to make data-informed decisions, to have research, to understand how we should make decisions. And additionally, the cool part about federalism to me is that we can watch states pass laws and be like, ooh, let's watch how that goes in Oregon. And then we can make it better in our state. And the Department of Education allows us to have the states have that autonomy, but also be unified in strategies that work. So to close, I'm in opposition to this because I do believe it's important for us to be unified as a nation in education. And additionally, and this is my personal opinion, I am not confident based on evidence of the last 5 years that our state would do its due diligence in ensuring funding and prioritizing all of the programs and students with greatest need. I don't see evidence of that based on Utah Fits All. I don't see evidence based on, thank goodness, SB 97 that just got vetoed. There's just little evidence for me to have full confidence in our state government to fully fund and support the programs that the Department of Education currently supports. So that is my talk about this, and I appreciate it, and I'm going to be voting against this regardless of where we end up.
Thank you, Member Reel. Can I just offer some clarity to the maker of that motion that this is the April 3rd draft? That would be accurate. That's accurate. Okay. With that, Member Lear.
So I'm assuming by April 3rd draft is the 2-paragraph draft that's much shorter, which I very much appreciated. I thought that was an improvement over the earlier draft. More general, not quite as demanding and disparaging of federal management programs. I also will not support this letter of intent, no matter how it looks. I have similar concerns to Member Reels. I'll try not to repeat those. But as I looked back, the one I want to emphasize, well, 2 things, and I'll try to remember the second thing after I give you a series of concerns I have. My first series of concerns is I've also not been impressed as I've looked back, especially in the last 5 to 10 years, of how the state has managed education funds. I think Utah Fits All is one example, not just in that it takes public education money and sends it to private schools, which I believe is unconstitutional and is currently before the court, but also there was an oversight entity selected, and only 9 months into the experience, it was decreed or decided that this entity was not doing a good job. And anybody in education could have explained that this was an overwhelming task that was not well understood. And there was no collaboration that led up to assigning this. So I think it's been, frankly, poorly managed, and very few people say that out loud, but I think it's evidenced by the fact that we're going to be getting a new program manager. Also, the example of SB 37, that was an end run and recognized by many, not just by this board, by the governor's office, by the state treasurer's office, the state auditor's office. Sorry, don't want to use the state treasurer. I don't think that was true. State auditor's office, that was an end run of using property tax dollars that have always gone to education and were understood by property taxpayers to go to education. Suddenly it was in the general fund. I have no confidence that this money could come to Utah and go into the general fund, the money for education, because that's what the people in charge get to do. And I'm not confident about that. I'm also I've participated in many sexual harassment investigations by the federal government. They are a pain. They are tedious. On the other hand, and they've changed back and forth for the last 3 or 4 years. I've never seen state investigations that follow their own LEA rules that are as fair to both parties as the regulations are now for sexual harassment investigations. So I welcome that. I also fear for smaller programs like McKinney-Vento. Probably if I say that, maybe half of you don't know what McKinney-Vento funds are. They serve children who are homeless. That's not going to be a popular use of funds for either the state or for individual LEAs. So I am one very grateful person that those children are served directly by federal regulations. I've also seen some actions by legislative leaders that I was not impressed with. Some bills that have been challenged as unconstitutional, some procedures in getting constitutional amendments that were inexpertly handled. I don't know, there is no evidence in my mind to say the state can do this better. And until I see that evidence, as opposed to the lack of evidence that I've seen, I am not about ready to support an imperfect, granted, federal program that gets money to a very important group of children in our state. Let me add that special ed is one piece of that, and it's hard to comply with special ed requirements. But the federal government has been consistent in holding the state responsible if the state doesn't hold students or doesn't hold LEAs responsible. So I think that's another very important concern I have. I'm also concerned, and the people who wrote me the emails I received about this, who opposed this, and said that they had concerns that this memo or this letter of intent, it's a letter, not a memo, did not impress upon the federal government that Utah expects to receive the same funding it has received previously. And my concern is if there's less red tape, there might be less funding. And that we can't afford to lose 11%, which it is, not 8%, of our funding, unless I see a check written by the state legislature to the State Board of Education. At that point, I would consider supporting such a letter of intent. So I'm not a supporter, and I would hope that, I don't know how this would happen, and I don't feel good about introducing an amendment and then saying I'm not going to support it anyway. But I would hope that there would be an additional sentence that would say, we expect that all the money that the state has received previously will continue to come to the state, even if it's managed by the state. Thanks.
Thank you. Member Green, and then we have Member Kelly and Member Bogus.
This is just a question for clarification. Didn't we pass something that was like an audit on what funds came from federal funding? And I forget what month that was, and I'm wondering where we are in that.
That was last month when we
Yes, wasn't
put
it?
some discretionary funds aside and did that. So I don't know if we've taken any movement. Scott, do you want to speak to that?
Chair Hymas, to answer the question, we have moved on it. The board directed, the the $150,000 to go towards that. I've shared the proposal with Board Member Carey as proof of principle that we're moving towards that. There was this, and forgive me, I can't remember if it was 60 or 65, but you know, that piece to it too. So timing wise, we're on glide path to do that. But there may be other considerations in the future, but for now we're following the board's direction. If that does that answer the question, Chair Amos?
I believe so. I believe there's a quick follow-up.
Do we have an estimated timeline, how many months that would take, and with everything kind of changing often, and how is that impacting?
So, Chair Hymas, I would
Moving
offer
forward.
this answer, is that despite what is going on or not going on in DC, that doesn't weigh in on the timeline associated with this. We're following the timeline. Once the engagement starts, we call audits engagements, right? Once the engagement starts, I think it's fair for me to say we're looking at least 4 months, but no more than 6 months. That's my estimation, subject though to who's selected and their final report on what they would predict or estimate the timeline be. Does that help answer the question, Chair Hymas?
It does. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Let's go to Member Kelly.
Thank you, Chair Hymas. Excuse me. Board Member Britton, I hope that I don't steal some of your thunder if you plan to comment, but Board Member Britton sent a letter to me that I think it is important to recognize that this type of thing is happening, but it's a letter from Brooke Rollins, the U.S. Secretary of Agriculture, addressed to Governor Gavin Newsom, where basically the U.S. Department of Agriculture is saying, hey, California, you are not following the law, therefore we are going to conduct an investigation and we are going to withhold federal funding from the state of California because you're not following the federal law. And I don't want to get into, you know, whether that's good, bad, right, or wrong, but I think it speaks to the divisive nature of politics that we're in right now, and the same thing could happen to Utah with the President of the United States or his cabinet stepping in and saying, "Hey, Utah, you're not following the federal law the way we want you to, therefore we're going to withhold your federal funding." And I think it's important for us to recognize that that we can move towards a place, and that's why we're calling this a letter of intent, that we intend to move in a direction that we are sovereign and that we are independent of the federal government. I think it would be important for us to work with our legislature to increase local funding and state funding for those programs, Title I, Title II, Title III, to move us in a direction where we become less dependent. And my number of 8 to 10% came directly from Deputy Superintendent Scott Jones, who told me that number is a little bit of a range depending on reimbursements in any given year. So that number can change and is not a steady number from year to year. But I think it's important for us to recognize that that it could be a different president that comes in and says to Utah, "Hey, Utah, we're going to withhold federal funding from you because you are not doing it the way that we want you to do it." So,
Thank you. Member Bogus?
Thank you, sir. So I think we've got a manifold issue here. We're talking about sovereignty, but that's not what we're getting with this letter. I think we have, sorry, my computer shut down. Well, those are actually screens. And so it says, oh, it's just really not liking me. I do apologize, Chair. See if this time will work.
Who else knows Christina's
Okay.
password? We can get her in.
Well, when you have a Mac, it only takes like 17 characters to get a password. So we have some language here, and it's almost like doublespeak. Because federal education funds come with federal education regulation, yet it says that we think we can do better, but we still want to be regulated, but give us our money. It just is like this circular thing. And so I'm very concerned about the lack of clarity here, because it's just not clear. And I would echo Member Reel's concerns and Member Lear's concerns. I do have concerns about how our state is managing education, maybe for different reasons, but I have those concerns. Regardless, I think it should be close to the states, and I think we have some real issues with some bureaucratic things that happen at the federal level. I personally would rather have things managed by the Department of Education for education than the Department of Health and Human Services, or the Department of Ag, or the Department of Workforce Services. And so it presents this conundrum wherein we advocate for the abolition of an agency which only redirects to an agency that is not an expert in education. It's a very interesting conundrum. And so with that, I would move my draft of the letter that, I apologize. Multiple stakeholders had input on that, and I would move that draft at this time. Thank you, sir.
So we have
It was put in backup yesterday morning, I think.
a substitute motion before the board then.
Yes, it is dated April 2nd, yes.
And Member Bogus, just keep an eye on the screen, make sure that captures the intent of your motion.
And then with a second, I'd be happy to speak to that.
Can we is there a date for Member Bogus's so that,
It says April 2nd on the letter. I understand that it would be updated with a date for professional purposes.
yeah, this is just for as
Okay.
we look at this. So,
Yeah, I appreciate that, sir.
Member Bogus, does this read correctly?
Yeah, so,
Okay. So the motion then is that the board approve distributing the letter of intent from April 2nd, 2025. Yeah, intent substitute letter, April 2nd, 2025. And we have a second. I don't know. I didn't catch you, Member Green. And then back to Member Bogus.
awesome, thank you. So, I think we have an inherent conundrum, and this board needs to make a decision. Do we stand in terms of firm separation, or do we want to continue to go in circles with the federal government, which ultimately just is like this ball of yarn, and it becomes tangled, it's a wicked web, and I think we need to stand on one side of the fence or the other side of the fence. But the previous letter, like just jumping jacks and gymnastics around the fence. This letter, it states that we believe decisions should be made as close to students as possible. It acknowledges the act that created the Department of Education and quotes it. It says it's in the intention of this Congress to protect the rights of states and local governments, rewinding our federal government, that was the intention to begin with, and that the present decision-making framework in education from the local level to the federal level is far too removed from the classroom. And in light of the 10th Amendment, that we believe that the federal government shouldn't have any say in that. And then we make a request that they repeal the ESSA and put this back into the hands of the states. That would be the first of many steps, but I think to list them out would be obnoxious. And then it closes with what true separation would look like. And true separation from the federal government would be to pursue a revenue neutral plan free from federal funding, and ask that our congressional delegation join us in these endeavors in our state and beyond. And then it closes with, we really look forward to working with you. It's maybe not perfect, but I think it contrasts very purposefully and overtly the difference between gymnastics around the fence and free from the feds. And so I'll put it out there and leave it to the body. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. We've got Member Bollinger.
Thank you, Chair. I've had a lot of emails, as many of you have, about this, as well as hearing public comment, and I am a firm believer in local control. Where I struggle is with this letter. I've had constituents ask me specific questions, and it's really hard when I say, I don't know what that will look like. I don't know the answer to that, because there are so many things happening, and it's happening quickly. And, we've heard from our state superintendent that they're getting different communications on a regular basis, that we don't know exactly what is happening. And although I love the idea of us being free from the bureaucracy of some of the federal funding, when we have federal laws, we're still required to follow those laws. I'll give you an example. IDEA, the Individuals with Disability Education Act, even if we don't get those federal dollars, we're still responsible for following those laws. And so my question would be, then, it was my understanding we have about, our percentage, and we've kind of talked about different numbers, around $600 million then would be the difference. And so I have to ask myself is, do our citizens of this state want to have taxes raised or cut other programs or opportunities, $600 million worth, to make sure that we would jump on board with this? Another question that I would have is, as a board, we could write this letter, but ultimately, our role is to administer, implement, and oversee state and federal funding and other programs for public education as outlined by our legislature. So we can desire and want to do these things, but really it's up to our legislature. And so I guess maybe, I don't know who this question would go to, maybe one of the makers of these letters is, have any conversations happened with our state legislature? Because honestly, we can write the federal government, but it's really ultimately our state legislatures that's going to be making these decisions. So just, some of my thoughts and questions, if anybody can answer to any of those pieces, I would appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Bollinger. Without seeing any lights, Member Lear.
You let me forget my second point. And given that it's not my fault, I will still be quick. But my second point was I received a very impressive email from a group that is the Center for Exceptional Children that works out of Weber State, comes out of Weber State. And I won't take as long as I was going to take to say that this group represents, let me just briefly tell you, educators in Utah's public institutions of higher education, professional development experts, licensed professional special education teachers, related service professionals, advocates for children, their families, and their teachers, elected board members of the Utah CEC division, and advisors of respected university student CEC chapters and concerned citizens. And the letter made the very excellent point, I think, of saying that there are many other pieces to federal funding that were not contemplated by this board asking for the money to come directly to the states. And some of that is related to higher ed, but it's also related to public ed, K-12, and I won't read through all those examples. But the final point that this group made to me was this might be good for the State Board of Education, it's not good for Utah children. And that really spoke to me in that in some ways it would give the board, theoretically, if the legislature allowed, more control over money, if we get it, but it wouldn't necessarily help the most vulnerable of our children. And I think the federal government, with all of its imperfections and warts, has done a better job in some cases. Note how many years we've tried to get just a little bit of state money for the most intensive needs for children with special education and have got zero. So I think in some cases the federal government does a better job than the state. And until I see data that say differently, I can't support this effort. Thank you for letting me speak twice.
Thank you, Member Lear. So the motion before the board then is remember it's a substitute motion, and that is that the board approve distributing the letter of intent, substitute letter, April 2nd, 2025. Let's go ahead and vote. That motion fails with 2 in favor, those in favor being Member Bogus and Member Green. So that brings us to the, original motion. Which is somewhere. It's to approve the letter of intent dated April 3rd, 2025. Well, that will come up on the screen shortly. We do have a comment from Vice Chair Wood. And then, Member Earl, I see you're in the queue.
Well, I appreciate and love the thought of us being able to manage things at a local level. I think sometimes the fact that we have to apply for waivers when we want to try to do something innovative with accountability and assessments, or we want to be innovative in our turnaround school process, that we have to apply for a waiver to say we want innovation. I am concerned even with this April 3rd letter, which is much better in that it refers specifically to special ed funding, or Title I or Title II, when we also get money from Title III, Title IV, Title V, Title VI, and roughly 2/3 of our federal funds are used in the child nutrition plan. So while we are saying, give us back these 3 things, there's other areas that also, and I think we're around 11% for this coming year, our expenditures may be. So I am concerned that this, we're not asking for actually what we need. And we have begged our local legislators. Prior to my time on the board, we went through many different requests to our legislators, fund us and let us cut the strings, and they have always said no. So I'm not sure that magically they are going to start saying yes when they have the intent. They'd like to see income tax go away. They're changing, they'd like to see more of the general fund growth. They have so many different areas that they'd like to use this money for. I don't think that we're going to see them suddenly give us the things that our students need at this time.
Thank you. Member Earl?
Yeah, I hopefully just addressed a couple of the questions that have come up. I do think, one, everything wasn't listed out, right? I just think the federal government's moving a direction currently. I think there's nothing wrong with us saying, if you're going this direction, we've got the qualifications to do this, right? I think letting them know that, and I think this also lets the legislature know we can do this, right? If this comes this way, and it looks like that's where it's headed, at least now, maybe in another 2 years it won't be, but right now, this is just, it's signaling, or it's just that, it's an intent to say, look, if those are coming this way, I want you to know we are competent to do this. We're competent to meet the needs. So I can't speak to all the, who knows what political interest out there or aren't. I do think that there may be other, data collections or whatever, as far as research and stuff, that those aren't addressed in here. This is just a broad statement of where our interests are, and that as they move this direction, that we would like to work with them. So I don't think it has to cover everything, but it does certainly cover key provisions. So anyways, let's comment.
Thank you. So the motion before the board then is that the board approve distributing the intent letter April 3rd, 2025. Let's go ahead and vote. So that motion fails 10-4. Those in favor being Member Carey, Member Hall, Member Kelly, and Member Earl. Thank you, board members.